On today's episode of Water Cooler Weekly, we are joined by social media manager of the Calgary Flames in the NHL, Torie Peterson. Torie talks about how she got into the role and some of the unique experience she has had that you won't come across in a normal 9-to-5 job. Torie speaks about her involvement in the community and charity work and the importance of women's hockey and women's sport in general. This is a very interesting chat, and I hope you enjoy learning more about Torie and some of the very important topics that we touched on. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe whichever platform you are watching or listening to this to. I'll be forever grateful. Thank you. Please enjoy the episode. All right, it's my pleasure now to introduce the social media manager from the Calgary Flames, Torie Peterson. Torie, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. This is awesome.
My pleasure. So first off, not many people who listen to this will probably have much of an idea about the end of the NHL season, but it was very similar to the NBA and it was very chaotic. I don't know if you wanted to touch on sort of what happened when the NBA shut down, the NHL pretty much shut down the following night, and it's only pretty much just finished a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so I remember, I don't have the dates in my head because it all kind of has blurred together since March when everyone started to work from home and things were paused. But our last game we played was International Women's Day, which I know that because I was doing the post-game broadcast. Mm-hmm. And then we had a few days between games. So the next night I was actually doing a speaking event for a University of Calgary event. And right midway through the event, the guy next to me who I work with elbows me and holds up his phone, and it's like a notification like NBA officially paused this season. And I was like, well, that means that we're probably paused as well, because there's no way that the NBA shuts down for a period of time and the NHL doesn't. So that kind of was the first indication we knew that night. I'm like, you know what, that's going to happen. No one really knew how long it was going to go on for, or if this was just going to be like the end of this season and we weren't going to play playoffs. As with this entire year as a whole, everything was very uncertain. Some of the guys, once we realized it was longer term than, a couple weeks, a lot of the players went back home. Not a lot of them stayed in Calgary unless they have year-long homes here, just because they weren't sure. And like, if you're going to cancel the season potentially and not have playoffs, you might as well go home now. So a lot of them went back. It took a few months to get the season kind of sorted. It was decided that was the end of the regular season. We're going right into a postseason, which would include a play-in round, which is the first time we've ever had it, like a round robin style tournament, to decide who technically was a playoff team. Because in March, you're getting close to the end of a regular season, but you don't really have an idea as to who's going to make it, because there's a lot of close calls in those bottom three spots in each division, in each conference. So to make it fair, a lot more teams made it into the bubble to start.
A lot more than they should have.
Yes, so it was a long round robin portion to figure out who exactly was a playoff team, although and there's no playbook for this, so I don't have a problem with it, but the round robin portion, the play-in portion, those stats are included in your playoff stats, because they couldn't figure out how to, and I don't know if there's a good way to decide how those stats count in the play-in round, so it counts as postseason points. And then they went right into a regular playoff format, just with no fans and in a bubble and with limited bodies from each club in the bubble. So each team that was in the bubble from day one had to have a content creator. That was an NHL mandated directive that we had to follow. Some teams sent 2. It depended on how many trainers that each team needed to bring. So we had 1, and we opted to send a camera guy who would send raw footage back to us to process and any kind of interviews. It was just easier that way, and he was willing to go. That's the other thing. I think a lot of people don't realize that there is a lot of people in the world who would be concerned about going into a bubble. Like it's not a lottery draw that you win a lottery to go into a bubble. A lot of people were like, I'm not 100% comfortable with this, whether it be for mental health reasons, fear of potentially an outbreak happening in the bubble, and that I'm sure would spread like wildfire. Thankfully, pro sports really kind of set the groundwork for that, and most bubbles had 0 cases, which is great. But you don't know how long you're going to be in there either, right? So if you have a family, that's really hard for a family to go, okay, well, mom or dad might be gone for up to 2 months in a bubble. The other parent that isn't then shouldered with that responsibility for 2 months without any kind of help. So like there were a lot of people who definitely had to take some time and make that decision for themselves personally. Thankfully, our camera guy's family was really, really accommodating in that sense. He has 2 kids, and he ended up going in and spending a decent amount of time in there, 2 rounds essentially with the play and then round 1. So that's how that kind of all transpired. Now it all kind of muddles together in your head because from the time that the season was paused officially to the time we got in the bubble, it just seemed like either it was endless days of waiting for information, or then all of a sudden we're in training camp and it was breakneck speed until the Flames lost out in technically round 1, round 2 if you're counting the rounds that they actually played in the bubble. It just felt like that time flew. And even since then, so since they've gotten out, I watched a bit of the postseason. I watched the final, which is normal for me. After the Flames are out, I generally don't pay a ton of attention to the playoffs until the finals. So get to the finals, watch the Lightning win. And then it's been a breakneck pace until about now because we had the draft and free agency, which looks a lot different than it normally does. So from season pause to season ending to free agency now has been both the slowest period of my life and the quickest. Like, I don't understand how it's mid-October right now because it feels like we just had the season paused, but the days seem to go slow. So it's been a year for the ages.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think like I read something that some players, when the training camp started to now, like they were like 29, and then when the season ended, they were like 31.
Oh yeah.
So like it's just. Yeah, I know for me personally, I remember being at work when the NBA was canceled. I'm like, oh, that's not good. And I just assumed that the season was over. I was like, there's no way that they could do a training camp because, you're essentially saying to the players like, hey, we're trusting you. We know that like you don't have to technically do all the right things, but we're really trusting you to do this because if you like become positive, then we're kind of screwed. And then I know like for me personally, there is almost no chance in hell I would have gone like voluntarily to do this, like especially when you don't know like how long you're going to be there for. Like I could not imagine like saying to like if I had a wife and kids, be like, hey, I'm going to go into this thing for potentially 2 weeks or 3 months. Like that would just be that would be an interesting conversation to have. I get one thing I do want to ask is, was there any point during the the sort of the downtime, and like the 3 months off, where you sort of started to maybe like not switch off, because obviously it's your especially your job, it's based around, a lot of it will be based around hockey being played. Did you switch off and focus on maybe different aspects of the business or something completely unrelated to hockey?
A little bit, but it was kind of the wait and see aspect kind of keeps you on your toes in that sense. We did have to start to really get creative with content when you don't know what's happening. That's the thing, when you're creating content for platforms and you aren't sure if you're going to play hockey again this summer. I mean, they're pushing for it and that, but there's no certainty in that. There was a period where there was zero certainty there. You have to get creative. We were like doing NHL 20 on live streams. I know a couple teams did that. And oddly enough, like as someone who's not a video gamer, like we have a couple of guys on our staff who are big into video games, and they they definitely handled the bulk of those executions. But those numbers surprised me. I think people were, during that time, a lot of people were in like high quarantine, as I call it, like where you just aren't leaving your house at all, and things weren't open then. So there wasn't a lot to do. You had like Netflix, you could read, or you could watch our live stream of like our NHL 20 game. And we tried to get as creative as we could with it, because the numbers were decent for the live stream, but we wanted to add something a little extra to it. So players were back home, often in quarantine and isolation, so they really didn't have a lot to do either. So we did a few like game interviews with guys for the live stream, which they got into it. They thought it was hilarious. They're like, no one's going to watch this. I'm like, people are watching it.
No,
please just do this interview. And it, like, they would go over their goals that we scored using their characters in these games, and like they did have some fun with it. So it was mostly trial and error from my end, in terms of what can we do to keep people engaged with this brand when we don't know if we're going to play this summer or not. We're not sure. We need to do something to keep people interested, because there's nothing else going on that's live. So that kind of kept me in a wait and see mode where you're on. And now that we're done with the draft and free agency is definitely slowed down compared to the first 2 or 3 days where there's a lot of signings. Now my brain is starting to go into that like actual off-season mode where I can relax. I don't think I relaxed once from when the season was paused until like probably yesterday. It was Canadian Thanksgiving, so like I had a nice Thanksgiving dinner, and like that's kind of when my body and my mind were like, okay, you can ease into the off season and not be so on your toes all the time. But that weird period of uncertainty where you just don't even know if you're going to be covering hockey in the summer I didn't allow my brain to ever really fully shut off. At least from a sports perspective. Even now, we have kids playing in Europe and in the Quebec Major Junior League in Canada. Most teams are playing. There's, I think, 2 teams that are technically in now hot zones where they saw a spike in COVID cases, so they're not playing at least for a couple of weeks while they wait for the cases to drop a bit. But the Q is playing in Canada, and in Atlantic Canada, they have fans in the stands. So there is still a part of me that has to pay attention to hockey. It's just not nearly as on my toes as it was before. Yeah,
it's interesting you mentioned the Q, because I was paying attention to a few years ago when I was living in Canada. I did a little bit of scouting work, and it was for this year's draft class, which we just saw. But immediately when I saw the Q was playing, I was like thinking, I'm like, this is really going to impact a lot of kids. Like if the Western Hockey League and the Ontario Hockey League doesn't play, or plays a significantly shorter amount of games, like that's going to put so many kids at an advantage. It's always interesting to think about it from that aspect. I never really thought this would happen. Like I've read a few things about the minor hockey rules now in Ontario, and it's like it's like get changed in your car, like no contacts, and it's like 3-on-3. It's ridiculous how much of an impact like this has had, like not just on a professional level, like it's affecting all the way, it's going all the way down to to the minor level.
And I don't think you saw a massive bump in terms of how kids were drafted this year, but I do think that kids playing in the Q and in Europe, where hockey is back to basically normal, most countries don't have fans, but the actual game hasn't changed, like you were saying. Like they haven't had rule changes to accommodate for this. I think you probably did see a few kids get bumped up a few spots higher than they would have went had the draft happened in June, because you get extra scouting time with these kids. From a junior hockey level, your scouts may not be in the rink with them, but they have all this footage and tape of them and how they're starting this season. So you're getting this little bump for kids who can play right now. And if you're an OHL player or a WHL player, you don't know when the season's going to start. They haven't set a date yet. They have target dates in mind and approximates, but unless you're playing, you're a lock for a World Junior team in December, You don't know when you're starting, right?
Hmm.
Like you could be starting in January, you could be starting in February, you might, who knows? Like what if this season is a wash? I don't know. You really hope it's not, because these leagues definitely need to play. They're not, financial powerhouses in the sense that they're able to, they have enough money to weather a storm and lose an entire year.
Yeah.
But also for these kids, you're losing an entire year of development at prime development age. So I think when NHL training camps start up, whenever that may be, I know they're targeting for an early January start for the NHL. So if you're going by that, you're probably going to see training camps mid-December.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of these kids who probably wouldn't have been invited to NHL training camps
And now going to be.
are going to be invited, just so that they can get those reps in and at least get some action in if those leagues haven't started yet. Especially the Canadian leagues, because there's no quarantine
Yeah.
issues in regards to that. American kids coming into Canada are going to have to come in 2 weeks early, because we do have a 2-week quarantine period for them. But like, you're going to see a lot of new faces in training camps if those leagues haven't started or don't have a start date in mind.
Yeah. It's yeah, one of the craziest parts about this, and uh, I remember like watching the draft a few weeks ago or last week, and there was a Russian kid, I completely forget his name, but they were like, because the KHL is playing now and he's had a super start to the season, they're like if the KHL wasn't playing, he wasn't a first round pick or something crazy like that. And you're like, you know, it's very easy to focus on the negative side of, things, but there's also, the positive like that where, a kid like that is, he's obviously going to go highly, regardless, but, that he gets a life-changing amount of money, or, a really good opportunity. So you're happy to see things like that. We'll step away from that, and we'll get into, sort of your, maybe how you started in journalism, what it was that made you sort of pick that, and then getting into, starting with Calgary and working for like a, team that you grew up supporting.
Yeah, so, well, I grew up in a hockey family. Oddly enough, I did not play organized hockey growing up, even though my dad is a lifelong hockey fan. My brother is named after Yari Curry, who is a Edmonton Oilers legend. He's an Edmonton Oilers fan. So grew up in a hockey family, lots of cousins that played hockey. I played soccer, but always grew up with the game and always was a fan. Um, and I didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished high school. I had no idea. So I had moved away. I lived in South Africa for a while. I came back and decided, you know what, you always liked writing. You always liked journalism. Why
Mm-hmm.
don't I give that a try? So I got into a program here in Calgary, moved down, and then did that. And part of that program was a 2-week internship. That was it. It was 2 weeks. And I just sent an email to the guy who was running the Flames website at the time, Mike Board, and he's now the GM of the Roughnecks. So couple of longtime CSEC employees, he and I. So he was like, yeah, sure. Why don't you come on down? Like, it's only me, and I could use a hand, especially with the writing. So I went and did my 2-week internship, and he's like, well, I can't go back to just doing this myself. And he managed to get me a contractor position. It was essentially full time, but it allowed me, obviously, games are at night, so I could still go to school, and I could do my job at night and work full time and make some money. It was great. And then when I finished that program, I went and got my communications degree at University of Calgary. But again, classes are during the day, most games are at night.
Yeah.
I just kept doing my job. And then when I finished university, they just changed my status to a full-time employee instead of contractor. So it kind of fell into my lap, to be honest. I'm very lucky. A lot of people do internships and don't get a job with the place, especially a 2-week internship. It's so short.
Mm-hmm.
But it worked out in my favor, and I've been there ever since. So it's really my only adult job. I've never had another adult job
Yeah.
anywhere. So, and my role has changed. It's like a completely different role than when I started. Like when I started, the NHL websites were like very, very rudimentary. There was not a lot to them. Social media wasn't a thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I grew into my role and it evolved, and I had a chance to learn as new platforms were popping up and as sports were growing in the digital and social space. So I've been really fortunate to be in an industry that's like definitely not slowed down at all. And it's become more and more pressing that teams and brands and athletes have a presence digitally and socially. So very, very fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's you see now with you mentioned the live streaming, like to people like you and me, it probably sounds or feels a bit silly, but it's actually huge. Like the Twitch and that side of things is exploding. So it's very interesting to me that you fell into the role, but at at a time when things were almost at its most undeveloped, and then you've been able to work in the job as things have evolved, and you've got to see firsthand sort of how social media has changed and how it's changed in the NHL. Do you think there's anything? Do you think that there's anything that you would probably prefer to have not changed into, whether that be I know one for me is the interaction, how easy it is to interact with players now. I think a lot of people use that the completely wrong way. Is there anything that you see maybe that you're like, I kind of wish it didn't evolve this way?
Yeah, I think you see the best and worst out of people on social. You get one of two extremes, and not just interacting with players, but brands and teams in general. The stuff that people can say behind a keyboard, they would never say to your face,
Hmm.
or they would understand that it's not, the person who runs the team accounts role to, they didn't make this trade that you hate and is apparently ruining your life, and how dare you, and like every team sees that. Those kind of responses are, that's not isolated to one team
Hmm.
or one sport.
Yeah.
But the way people interact with athletes is definitely unique. And I think you see some athletes who have a personality outside of social that you think, oh, this would lend itself great to social. Like they would be great on Twitter, they'd be great on Instagram, or whatever it may be, whatever platform they like. But because of how people have interacted with them in the past, they're like, we're not going to use this.
Hmm.
Like, it's not worth it. And you can have the thickest skin of anyone, but there's going to be days where people, tweeting at you horrible things will get to you. Doesn't matter how thick your skin is, there's going to be days where that's going to get to you. And I think you see not just athletes, but anyone in the spotlight kind of shy away when they get inundated. Like no one is coming up to you on your day off and tweeting like you're terrible and horrible and like how dare you and you've ruined my life, blah blah blah. Like if I have a bad day at work, no one's tweeting at me personally like with
Yeah.
that ever. But when you're an athlete or a celebrity or anyone kind of in that spotlight, all of a sudden all of your actions are magnified to an unreasonable extent is how I would view it. So like everyone has bad days at work, everyone has bad days in general. Everyone's not going to be at 100% all the time. It's just that you and I don't have to deal with people being very vocal and critical of that in a public sphere.
Yeah.
So I think that does, the way people interact with athletes or anyone in general on social can either be great. You see some really great responses and really heartwarming responses, but then you see the polar opposite where you're like, okay, like calm down. It was a game in January on a Wednesday night where like nothing changed in the standings. Like this meltdown over this player's performance is not warranted in any way, shape, or form. And when it becomes personal, it really is like, I don't know. I just can't ever envision someone going up to someone they don't know and saying the things that they've typed to them on Twitter or Instagram or wherever it may be and saying it to
Yeah.
their face. I always think that's a really good rule. Would you go up to whoever this person is and say this to their face? If the answer is no, you shouldn't type it. Also, like, just don't delve into personal things. I don't know. That just
Yeah.
feels like a normal human courtesy that we should all extend, but everything is magnified on the internet. So
Absolutely. I think if your rules applied to Twitter, we're going to lose 73% of tweets. Like
it's
Twitter can be, Twitter is genuinely the worst place in the world sometimes. Like I'll go on for 5 minutes and I'm like, oh, I don't know where I found myself. I have to get off. It's just some of the things you see on there is just it's horrific. But it's really interesting that you point out like I've never had someone come up to me in the street and say, "Hey, that spreadsheet you did yesterday was really shit and it's ruined my day." So let's touch on a few positive things rather than Twitter and the worst it can be. Since you've been with the Flames, I know they've played a few trips overseas, like they've played in China and Germany, I believe. I don't know, maybe talk about those experiences, or any sort of experiences. I know we've had a few outdoor games which were a pretty good experience. Maybe touch on a few of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had two Heritage Classic games, one in Calgary and one in Winnipeg, and both were amazing. The one in Calgary was minus 30 Celsius.
Hmm.
It was freezing. It was really cold. That's what I remember. That was in 2011, I believe. So it was a while ago.
It
It
was,
feels
yeah.
ancient, especially this year. But the last one was just last fall, less than a year ago somehow, in Winnipeg, which was amazing. Or sorry, not Winnipeg. It was in Regina. We played Winnipeg.
Yeah.
They had a neutral zone site. And so in Canada, the CFL, which is American style football, but the Rough Riders have what you would call the ultimate fanatical following. Rough Riders
They're
fans are
interesting.
insane.
Yeah.
And so, but it's huge in the city, right? So the money flowing from this, it's a smaller league, but the
Mm.
money flowing into this one team has allowed them to build this incredible stadium. So we had the luxury of playing this outdoor classic against Winnipeg in their basically brand new football stadium, and it's massive, like state of the art, beautiful NFL style, which is amazing. So it was cold, not nearly as cold as the one in Calgary, but it was pretty cool to have it in a neutral site.
Mm.
I've seen preseason games played in Regina. We used to play a couple of our preseason games, usually in Saskatoon and Regina, but in their WHL rinks, which are a fraction of the size of a
A lot
NHL
smaller.
rink, and they're a lot older.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of charm, but like Wi-Fi connections are real hit or miss in those old school hockey rinks. They're like barns. It's fun to watch, not so fun to cover a game in. We unfortunately lost the Heritage Classic this year in overtime, though. So hit or miss, you never know what's going to happen.
Hmm.
Going to point out of it, but it was really cool to see, and the atmosphere was jam packed. And since it was in between Calgary and Winnipeg, the stadium was basically split, which is pretty
Yeah.
rare. So that was really cool to see. I think fans like more than got their money's worth. They got to see overtime. It was a fun game, and in the middle of the game, and considering it was in October, like you don't know what the weather's going to be like. Like last week, it was 20 above here. This week it's snowing. So you never know in Western Canada, and it was
Yeah.
warm leading up to the
To the
event. So I
game.
was like, oh, I was wondering if all the ice is going to be bad, blah blah blah. The ice was great. The ice was state of the art. It was awesome, but it started to lightly snow midway through the game, and it
Mm.
was like this weird picturesque out of a movie style image that you had going. So it was just a really memorable event.
Yeah.
We've done the most recent global series we've done is the games in China, which was insane. Like it was very cool because I've been all over the world, but I've never been anywhere in Asia at all. So this was my first time in China, first time in Asia. So it was just a really unique experience. And I believe every player, at least from our side, have never been to that part of the world. So it was a really cool experience. We did the Great Wall. Um, Shenzhen was really cool. So it's by Hong Kong. So it's built to kind of rival Hong Kong. So you have all the modern amenities of Hong Kong, but in China, which was a unique thing too. Like the shopping malls were crazy. I'm
Hmm.
like, where am I? Like, is this like in space? Like it was insane. And the food was amazing. If you like Asian food, like Asian street food, oh,
Yeah.
like Beijing
Incredible.
was absolutely incredible. And I remember we went to this like hole in the wall place to grab some food, and we were looking at thankfully had one of our we have correspondents, so we have a Flames TV Chinese, almost a sub program. It's a series with a local guy, Brian Wong, who usually does it in Mandarin or Cantonese. It kind of
Mm-hmm.
depends on which audience he's targeting, because the
Yeah.
Calgary Chinese community is split. So Brian's like, I'm actually going to be in China during that time. Like, can I come and do some videos with you guys? Which was amazing, because in Shenzhen, we actually could get by without a translator. In
Mm-hmm.
Beijing, we could not, for all the stuff we
Yeah.
were doing. So we're going through the menu in this hole in the wall place with Brian, and he's like, oh yeah, the beers are down there. And I'm like, that has to be a misprint, because even my like very, very basic Mandarin, I was doing the conversion in my head. It was like 2 cents Canadian for beer, a bottle of beer.
Oh,
I couldn't believe it. And I'm like, this is the best food I've ever eaten. And I'm also getting a literal 2 cent beer with it. Like, what is
that's
going
trouble.
on here?
Yeah.
It's so good.
I
Like,
might
it
need the
was
name of that
just,
place.
well, I don't even know if it had a name. It was that hole in the wall, but I could give you directions. It's across from the Walmart, which I was like, like the Chinese Walmart was insane. I'm like, it was a bunch of us, and like players were in there buying all this stuff, like the different flavored chips and cookies. Like players were like loading up to bring
Yeah.
home because it's such a novelty. Um, but like that experience as a whole, like they were preseason games, and I believe we lost both of them. Honestly, the games themselves were like, other than
Relevant.
the atmosphere, they're irrelevant. They're preseason. And also
Mm-hmm.
you're playing a totally different time zone in a totally different country with totally different practice routines. Like, I don't know, I wasn't taking into stock the actual results, but the experience was cool. And they were both games were packed. So it was really neat to see a culture that generally doesn't embrace hockey or hasn't historically get right into it. And I think these, you might not see like a massive movement in terms of revenue in China, in terms of hockey there right now. But I think long term, for growing the game, these series are so important, because one of the focuses was bringing in the younger generation and also
Mm-hmm.
investing money into youth hockey programs. So like you've seen China become powerhouses in different sports, basically in the exact same footprint that the NHL is trying to go about here, providing resources for minor hockey to get kids into the sport at a young age, providing them opportunities to watch programs by having these global series, and then introducing maybe more broadcast rights like in the country all over with their cable networks there. So that was really cool to be a part of. It's an experience I don't think like most people, even in pro sports, would ever get to have. So I'm very grateful for that experience. And I travel a lot. I travel with the team. So the last 10 years of my life, I've been on the road a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a unique experience that, again, most people don't get with their 9 to 5s. So
Yeah.
that's just that what you learn from being able to like be on the road and adapt to different situations. And hey, your Wi-Fi is down, what do you do? Things like that. It sounds ridiculous, but our job is so
Yeah.
instantaneous.
When it's your
You need to be
job.
able to read and react on the fly, and being on the road and in different countries and different cities has been really beneficial in that regard. And I think as a professional development standpoint, like you can't ask for better experience than that. So really, really fortunate.
Yeah. One question I have on that is, do you ever find because you travel with the team, when they go, when they go out to Dallas or they go out to New York or wherever, do you ever struggle with that sort of being 2 days at home, 2 days on the road, like back and forth? I mean, it can, just like for me, literally thinking about going through that right now, I could see how that could be sort of taxing, especially when you're constantly like producing, like, so it's not like, like, oh, I'm off to LA, I'm going to go to Disney World. Like, it's like it's for your job.
No, it didn't until about the last year, to be honest. And I think that's a getting older thing. When you're young, you're like, oh, this is nothing. And because that's kind of my only real work experience has been go, 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 in different locations. And also I travel a lot on my own. So I'm already naturally inclined to be in kind of that state of flux. I'm not a
Hmm.
homebody per se. Although I think post 2020, that may change, because I've been home since March. Like I haven't been on a plane. I've seen my parents. They live 6 hours north of here. That's about it. Like I haven't even gone on vacation to like BC or anything like that, even though that's within driving distance of me. So I think that's probably, it's an age thing maybe. You hit 30 and you're like, oh, why am I sore and tired all the time? I want to stay at home and I want to watch Netflix. And I think because I've gotten into such a routine, be at home and working from home, and being in one place and not have to run around all the time and constantly be thinking 3 steps ahead. I think maybe my internal clock is kind of changing to be more of a homebody, but that's only been within the last year where I've started to feel like that bit of exhaustion that comes from being in a different place at different times. So
yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be in a similar boat. That's regardless of sort of how far or how much they travel for work. I know that every time I open my wardrobe, my suits just laugh in my face. They're like, there's no way you're getting back into this when you have to go back into the office. It's going to be very difficult for so many people who are just literally sort of 5 minutes to 9, they just roll out of bed, put their moccasins on and just get to work. It's going to be a very difficult switch to get back to that. One thing before I forget, my first experience in Canada was very unique. So never been to the snow before. I knew obviously there was going to be cold, but I didn't plan too far ahead. So I left during our summer. It would have been about 36 to 38 degrees on the day, Celsius. Flew into LA, then LA to Calgary, landed in Calgary, minus 26 in shorts. Never experienced snow before. So the coldest it really probably gets here hovers around maybe 5 to 10 degrees during winter. And that was the most shocking experience, like walking out of Calgary airport to feel that I've ever experienced in my life. It was I still remember it, and because the day I arrived was the day of the Grey Cup final, which I had no idea about, and Saskatchewan was playing. And so I was walking down around downtown Calgary, just sort of checking it out. And I remember some guy walked past me in green spandex with a watermelon on his head. And I was like,
and you're probably like, why did I move here?
Yeah.
What is going on?
You know what? You hear people say things about Canadian people that they're unique. I'm like, watermelon that's not what I was expecting. But then I remember seeing like another person wearing something similar, like wearing all green, had a flag wrapped around him and watermelon. And so I actually went up and said to him, I was like, hey, I don't want to be a dick, but why are you dressed the way you are? And he explained it to me. And then I ended up finding a bar and watching it, and it was filled. It was filled with Rough Rider fans, and I'm not sure the word you used to describe them, but holy crap, that was a really eye-opening experience to Canada. Like that's
just
how
the
I was.
Weather.
I know, it was surreal. Like I remember getting off the plane, and there was a lady, elderly lady, dressed up as like a kind of cowboy outfit, cowgirl outfit, yep. and she just welcomed me, and I was like, are you just a random person, or do you work here? It was a very interesting welcome to Canada that I had. But all right, so let's touch on some of the other things that you've done. Like you mentioned about the Flames Foundation, which is the Calgary Flames charity, and the work that they do with the Special Olympics, and sort of that's something that you've been involved in. So maybe just touch on what they do and sort of some of the good things that they've done. And I know they play a hockey game every year at I'm blanking right now, but it's incredible.
Alberta Children's Hockey.
Yeah, when you see the video of the game every year, it's incredible to watch. So yeah, maybe just give us a rundown on the work that they do and you've been involved in.
So the Flames Foundation is the charitable arm of Calgary Sports and Entertainment as a whole. So we own 4 teams, with the Flames being the primary one, the biggest one of the 4. So they are, I guess we own 5. We own the Stockton Heat as well. So we have a pretty wide spread in terms of the sports landscape, at least in this city. So the Flames Foundation acts to give out grants and money to charities in need in Southern Alberta, not just Calgary. So I believe they give out $6 million Canadian a year to local organizations and charities, which is amazing work. And they generate funds through, we do in-game 50-50s, which in Canada, 50-50s are huge, a massive revenue generator for us, as well as charity events. We do a golf tournament, things like that to raise funds. And then in addition, we do a lot of auctions, jersey auctions and stuff like that. So this year has been a little different, obviously, given the situation in the world. So we also introduced a COVID program this year, which grants funds to organizations who have either taken a massive hit in their funding due to COVID, or have seen a huge skyrocket in their usage because of COVID. So things like food banks and we've been working with a lot of seniors' homes in that regard to provide funding and resources for them. So I believe over $2 million has now been distributed since April, when that COVID program was put into place. But all of our regular programming through the foundation has continued through this, which is good to see. And that's a lot of hard work from a small foundation staff who've put their heart and soul into their work. So we do a ton of stuff with the Special Olympics. It's a tie that we've had since the team arrived in 1980, and has only grown. And we have quite a few players who have personal connections to Special Olympics, like long time. Like Michael Backlund has been a long-time ambassador for Special Olympics Alberta because he has a cousin with Down syndrome, so who is a Special Olympic athlete in Sweden. So for him, it's a natural tie. So he's worked with not only the foundation, but Special Olympics as a whole. And then from a staff perspective, a lot of our initiatives kind of spread into our personal life. So for myself, my brother's autistic and is a Special Olympic athlete here in Alberta. So obviously a personal tie for me. But the Flames Foundation supports a local charity called Motion Ball. So they provide funding to Special Olympics, and their main goal is to bring in more of our demographic in terms of donors. So you're trying to find millennials who will be longtime supporters of Special Olympics, and you're building out basically this campaign through getting millennials involved in different events around the city, fundraising, galas, things like that. So they have an annual event called Marathon of Sport, which the Flames are big supporters of. And because we provide funding to keep this running every year, they also give us some teams to participate as well. That being said, we would pay no matter what. We more than fundraise past the amount that it costs, or that it costs you to register for this. So we've done it for, I'm thinking, like 5 or 6 years now, as just staff, and we've raised over $100,000 as a staff. So it's I think probably 7 to 10 person team every year, depending on who's available in the summer to participate. And we do not only our own personal fundraising, but we also fundraise through the building and McMahon Stadium, I guess, as well. Yeah. Bake sales, wine raffles, like whatever we can think of to fundraise, we do. So that kind of bleeds in from the Flames Foundation aspect. And a lot of us, and people who work in sports for more than a few years, I find you become really close friends with your colleagues who have been there a long time as well, because it's such a unique job and such a unique industry that it's hard to find other people who understand, your day to day. So we have this very tight knit group of people who participate every year, who've been with CSEC for between 5 to 10 years. And like every year, it's just like, it's a no brainer. We're automatically participating. Our goal is to always raise more than the previous year. This year, obviously, could not go about with the annual event because it is a day full of sports. But the fundraising went ahead. So Motion Ball, we're like, no, we're still going to go ahead. They had an online component for Special Olympic athletes to participate online. But for us, it was fundraising. So we did the same thing, nothing in person, but we hustled all of our coworkers, our family, our friends, and we were able to raise over 10 grand again this year. So I think being involved in sports, you start to get really involved with the foundation aspect as well, because you see the good that organizations can do for the local communities, and the money that we can raise through entertainment, and what we can do for our cities and our province as a whole. So that's been really gratifying, and not something I would have thought of when I was getting into sports, to be honest. But the charity component of it has definitely taken on a fairly significant portion of my life.
You get to see firsthand the impact that, just even if it's, just the mascot, like showing up to, whether that be the children's hospital or them meeting a player, like that experience for them, while it might not seem a lot to, say myself, that kid that's changed his life. Like those experiences for them are incredible. And I know I have a friend who works at Sick Kids in Toronto, and she mentioned that, when the Leafs players would come down, just how much of an impact it would make. Like, so that's honestly incredible, from the fact that, you mentioned your brother, and there's the personal aspect, and then, seeing just how much, even in a time of difficulty, you're still sort of, everyone's still on the same page, everyone's still hustling and trying to, make a difference. Yeah, it's incredible, and I do commend you for that, because the Flames Foundation does a lot of great work, and it's really good to see that. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to touch on that, or if you wanted to jump into women's hockey, because it's a very important topic, I think, right now. The fact that there's no real, we had the two different leagues, which have sort of now. So I don't know if you wanted to maybe just give us a run through of what the landscape is.
Sure. So there was two separate, like, technically pro women's hockey leagues in North America for quite a few years. They were both smaller, but the Canadian Women's Hockey League unfortunately folded. I think it was 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
It was
2 or 3 years ago. So the women that were in that league they were not interested in joining this other league for whatever reasons that they had personally. So they've decided to create a professional women's players association, essentially. So and it's very grassroots, and these women are legitimate superstars in some sense, in the fact that they're from an international standpoint, they're like, the Wayne Gretzky's of women's hockey. So they're very, very influential on the international scene, but they don't have a regular league to play in right now, which is a huge detriment for everyone's skill development, no matter what sport you play. So they've banded together to create this players association, and they do different tours around North America. So they do 2 or 3 games, usually Canada versus US, because that rivalry is quite storied, and generally drives a decent crowd, because people love those games. Those international games between the two countries get a lot of play in the hockey market. So they generally do that, and they've been all over North America the last couple of years doing these. They call them the Gap Tour, which gives them the opportunity to practice and play meaningful games while preparing for international competitions and keep their skills up to par. So they've also been very involved in the NHL the last couple of years. So the NHL has brought them in the last 2 years to the NHL All-Star Game in January. And quite frankly, and this is without bias, I think that's been the most interesting part of the All-Star Games in years.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Because the All-Star competition and game is generally, like, guys don't want to get hurt. They're not giving it their all. Like, they're not going to go full tilt for a game that doesn't really mean anything when they're in the middle of a season and they're trying to give their body some respite. That's just natural. That's not going to change. The women's 3-on-3 game is very competitive, and it's Canada versus US.
There's no love lost.
There's no love lost. Like, it was you should have seen in the press room this year in St. Louis. Like, there's people who are working on other things, and it was just on in the background. By the middle of that game, no one was doing any work. Everyone was watching this game because it was fast-paced, and there's no love lost, like you said, and they were playing like they were in the middle of the Olympics. Like, it was really interesting to watch, and a really great showcase for women's hockey. So before the CWHL folded, there was a team in Calgary, which we were very supportive of. And
they won the last title, did they not?
They did. They won.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like very good team, and we benefit from the fact that Hockey Canada is based out of Calgary. So a
Yeah.
lot of women who play on the national team already live here. So we're very
Hmm.
lucky in that regard. The Canadian national team. So the when that league folded, some of them stayed here and are continuing to train at Hockey Canada facilities, in addition to doing the Gap Tour when those are going. So we try to stay as involved as we can with them. A couple of them have done events with us for the Flames during these 2 years where they haven't had a league. But if there is a league to be had, which I think is coming sooner than later, a women's pro league that they'll essentially create on their own through their own hard work and grassroots initiatives. I'm sure there'll be a team in Calgary, and obviously we'll be very supportive.
Hmm.
But it does take, because women's sports are still kind of on the cusp, especially women's hockey, of becoming very popular. You kind of need a champion internally. It's not that organizations don't want to support them. It's just that sometimes it's not on the radar. There's a lot of stuff going on with a pro sports team, outside of the actual hockey or game itself. Like there's a ton of stuff going on, ticket sale revenue, broadcast deals, charity work with foundations, things like that. So sometimes it's hard to keep on top of things that you as an organization will support,
Hmm.
but you need to have someone keep it on their radar. So I've been fairly active in that regard. That's kind of been my baby over the last couple of years. And we've seen a really great response from our fan base. Definitely there's interest there. And I think if and when that league, pro league, comes into play, I'm sure it will be affiliated with the NHL,
Hmm.
in some way, shape, or form. And there's a team in Calgary. I think you've got already a very good fan base built in here from that. And with our support, we're able to bring maybe a few new audience members to that sport in that league and that group of women. So we've been very supportive in that sense. And I think you're starting to see in general women's sports are taking off. This year has been really, really strong for women's sports. Like the NWSL, that was the first bubble, professional sports bubble, to be
Hmm.
successful. They
Yeah.
launched and completed it before men's sports were even back up and running. So they kind of set the groundwork there for that. They're also outpacing the MLS here in viewership, like by a significant amount. Like it's very impressive to see that grow. And the WNBA, which just wrapped up with the NBA season as well, I think they said they saw a 65% increase in viewership, which is
Yeah.
insane. Like that's a huge number. Like you're usually
Hmm.
happy with a 5% increase. You're like, oh my God, like 5%, that's a ton. 65% is like unheard of. So I think we're kind of at a moment in sports history where women's sports are taking off and becoming much bigger and much more popular. So it's a great time for a women's league to come into play here. So I think even with the pandemic and 2020 happening, I think they still have a ton of momentum heading into a league.
Hmm.
And hopefully we're able to capitalize on that.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on the women's soccer there. I know from an Australian point of view, so we have Sam Kerr, who's signed with Chelsea, I believe. And the Women's World Cup, I remember watching every game. Like we're sort of, as Australians, our men's team has never really been sort of that good up until maybe like the last 10 years, and they're still not that good. But like they managed to qualify for the World Cup, and it was such a big moment, such a huge moment for people as a country, because we're like, holy shit, we get to see our men's play in the World Cup for the first time in 30 years. But our women's team's incredible. Like we have some of the best players in the world, and I remember we beat Brazil. I think we beat Brazil at the World Cup, or if not, then we beat them before, and it's like our men's team would never do that.
That's
So
like Canadian soccer though, right? Like most people, and American too. Like
yeah,
like I know Americans are like, we have a men's team. Like there's no comparison to the men's and
yeah,
women's in terms of international success. And you guys are hosting the next Women's World
yeah.
Cup. So like that's going to be, I think, a huge momentum shift.
Mhm.
Again, they had over a
Yeah.
billion viewers the last Women's World Cup. Like if you invest a little bit in women's sports, the return I think is going to be massive, and you're just starting to see that. It's like the wave is just building now. So by the time we're able to get a women's hockey league that's up and potentially has broadcast rights with different networks, maybe has a little bit more financial stability to start, because you do need that. Men's sports get plenty of financial runway to start. They lose a
Yeah.
lot of money, which people tend to not talk about. They don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about like how much success they've had. But a lot of men's teams and leagues get a lot of financial runway to start, and you see owners lose a lot of cash there. So women generally don't get nearly the same investment. But I don't think you need to invest a lot in a lot of women's leagues, because women in general in sports have had to be so industrious to get known, to get into a pro league, to get themselves a little bit more financially secure in that regard. They built up a pretty good foundation, and now we're going to start seeing more and more people watch these sports, embrace these athletes. So for us, it's a no-brainer to support women's hockey, and it never has been something that we even considered not doing. Like, we've always been involved in women's hockey in Calgary. So as an organization, that's really great to see. And for someone who is working in that space and kind of acting as that champion as we move forward, to make sure that we're remembering to provide content for people who, you know, might be into women's hockey or getting into women's hockey, we're able to provide them with a lot of content and a lot of context. So that's been a personal passion project for me, but also, like, I just think it's a very smart business opportunity as well. So
Yeah, that's you just made an exceptional point, which I don't want to like gloss over. A lot of the arguments you get or you hear from people is that, oh well, it won't revenue as much money. The men's game generates this much revenue, but you're not looking at it from the point of view is that, like, yeah, it takes a while for these teams to takes it a long time for teams to make money. And then also the costs associated to, say, the women's game might not necessarily be, anywhere near as much. So that's a really good point you make, and probably something that a lot of these people who are just simply dismissing the argument for a pro league, which shouldn't even be an argument if you ask me. The NHL has to be involved. That's just my personal opinion. I don't want to. I know you're employed by an NHL team, so I'm not going to say that that's your opinion. But my personal opinion is the NHL has to, and it should already be in place. Considering how big the game is in Canada and even in America, like the gold medal game, 2018, that was one of the best hockey games I've ever seen. Like, I remember that was it was super late and I had to get up early for work, and I couldn't stop watching. Like, I was on genuinely one of the best hockey games I've ever seen in my life.
And those two teams genuinely hate each other on the ice. Like, it's insane because I've seen them interact off the ice. And you've seen it. Like, the rivalries in the NHL are just not really there anymore. Like, guys don't hate each other. They grow up playing against each other. It's not a hatred. These women hate each other when they're playing. Yeah. I'm like, how you were just talking to her like yesterday, like your best friends, and now you're like, there was a bench clearing brawl a few years ago. I remember that, and that wasn't even in like an actual meaningful game. It was like an exhibition game, and like you had stars from both the USA and Canada throwing fists at each other, which you never see in women's hockey. And I'm like, these people, like, they hate each other, and it's really fun to watch because the games become that much more intense, right? So there's just so much more to them than you're watching a random NHL game on a Wednesday night of it, like Columbus against San Jose. Like, there's no hate there.
There's no emotion in it. No, I know what you mean. And the thing you brought up before about the All-Star game with the 3-on-3 game, like, once again, just my opinion on the All-Star game, it is very unwatchable. Like, the skills component, the games have sort of always been, I mean, you're like, oh, cool, that's a really cool play, but the defenseman is backing off, and it's fairly lackluster. The skills competition is not enjoyable, but like, these girls literally understood. They're like, we have a moment, we have a stage. Like, there might be people in the crowd talking. Let's get them to stop and watch. And it was. And I've completely blanked on her name. She did the speed skating. I think it was
Kendall Coyne.
Kendall Coyne. And I think that was the first time the NHL had factored in a female into the All-Star game, and she didn't just like hold her own. Like
She
she
beat some
flew.
guys.
She legitimately beat guys. So
And then the same, and I don't know if this was televised. It was in San Jose. I remember that, and it was Brianna Decker. She set the time
yeah,
record for the actual. I don't even remember. It was the passing. It was the passing one.
yeah,
Where you had
I
to like
remember
make
reading
the
about that.
accurate passes, and like Leon Draisaitl was technically the winner,
Mm,
but she beat his time and
yeah,
she was more accurate.
yeah,
I don't like, because she was like the demonstrator was what they'd used
yeah.
her for, was to
That's what they
showcase.
said.
They're like,
Yeah,
oh well, she technically didn't win, she was the demonstrator. But you know what that did for her was that, you know, people got mad and they're like, she beat Leon Draisaitl's time, she's the winner, like there's
yeah,
no question. She did it in under 30 seconds. And so I believe it was CCM gave her
yeah,
25K, which is the
yeah,
prize that NHLers get. So
yeah.
she ended up not only getting the 25K from CCM, but then that year Adidas was like, these women are so marketable, they signed
Mm,
all of them that were there, they're all now Adidas branded. So
yeah.
like, just those little opportunities mean so much to athletes who are kind of on the cusp of you know, becoming, not, I don't want to say becoming pro, but becoming more well known. These
Mhm.
events are like perfect showcases for the talent there.
Yeah, absolutely. A few of the people that I've had on here, like one that I've aired already, one that I'm gonna air later on. They're both semi-professional or professional athletes, and I think if you know they're sort of on the cusp of that, on the cusp or close to that sort of next level, and if you could ask them for an opportunity, something like this, that it would be the first thing they would be like, he's like, that's the first thing I want. Like a lot of a lot of these girls have, and you know, men in the same situation, they have they have a professional mindset already. So, and I think you need to, because you know, a lot of these females have to, they have to work 9 to 5 jobs, you know, and then obviously go to the rink at, you know, at later hours, and you know they have to go to the gym at, you know, these, you know, unusual times, which just, you know, in terms of ice hockey, men just won't ever experience that at the NHL level. So yeah, it's incredible to see them get that opportunity, but I think there has to be there has to be, and I really do hope that there is a um, you know, there is a professional league that is supported by the NHL and given a chance to you know, not just sort of hang around for a season. Like we want it to, you know, be around for a significant amount of time, because you have so many young females in North America who are, you know, what have they got to, you know, look at, you know, without a professional league? Like there's, you know, like I want to play for Canada, but it's like you can see that the road to that is increasingly, you know, getting more difficult without a professional league.
You need somewhere to develop, right? Like,
Mm,
and you need to play against competition of your caliber. It's one thing, like a lot of these girls are going to be playing when they're in high school against inferior competition. That's just the way it
mm,
is. And a lot of, well, a lot of men too, right? Like when you're an elite athlete, you tend to play against inferior competition as you're growing up because
yeah,
you're so much better. But in order to get even better than you already are, you need to be playing against athletes of your caliber. So a league provides that opportunity for development, which is great for international hockey, which is already fairly large in the women's game. But like we were talking about, it just makes financial sense. And I
hmm,
have no doubt that the NHL will be very involved, if not owning that league, because they see the success other women's leagues have. And they're
yeah,
like, it makes financial sense. This is not, I hate when people view it as a charity, because it's not. There's revenue to be made. So
yeah, absolutely.
uh, while being able to expose hockey fans to even more of the sport. So it's win-win.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, even if you think about it from, you know, not from a business side of it, um, the NHL is always doing things, trying to do things into the community to, you know, to engage certain, you know, certain communities or certain sectors of people. It's like you have so many you literally have an incredible market which is filled with incredible young hockey players already. It's like you don't need to say, we touched on China. That's a market obviously which is huge in terms of population, but that you're not going to get the level of players or the quality of players over the next 2 years. So yeah, I really do hope that the NHL does sort of get involved. I'm not sure if there's anything else you wanted to touch on or go into.
No, I think we covered a lot today. That was a lot
We
of
did.
ground.
No, that was really good. That was a really good chat. And yeah, I know a lot of people that listen to this will have, little to no sort of exposure to hockey. So it's really good to touch on that number of different things. The women's game, as well as the Flames Foundation and the work that they've done and the impact that can make. So that's really good, and also learning about your journey into this job, or how you fell into this job, which has been your only adult job, which not a lot of people can say. So no, it's yes, I just want to thank you for agreeing to do it and being so open. It was it was very insightful chat, and very enjoyable.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I feel like I talk too much. It's like it's been a while. I looked at the clock and I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking his ear off. You have to stop.
No, don't worry. The people who listen to this, they want to listen to other people. They don't want to listen to me. So they're not listening to hear me. So it'd be a good change.
Well, I'm glad. And I just wanted to throw out there, like next Winter Olympics, which I think is 2022, if my math is correct. Like if you're tuning into any winter sport and you're not a winter country, like if you're Australia, I would tune into a women's hockey game. The
Mm,
Canada-US is just like it's like a bloodbath. So
it
like
is.
that sounds awful, but it's the most
No,
entertaining hockey you're gonna find. So
no, absolutely. And we're a country that's, all of our like major sports are, whether it's strain rules football or rugby, can be quite violent. So everyone that sort of watches hockey for the first time that I know that will reach out to me, and they'll be like, I actually kind of love watching hockey. So it's a sport, and obviously I'm coming with a very biased view, but it's a sport that's built for Australia. Honestly, like despite the fact that we don't get snow, and we only have like 8 rinks in our entire country, but I've taken friends to games in our national league here, and they're like, this is incredible. These guys are literally just going out trying to kill each other. So yeah, definitely check it out, because yeah, I touched on it before, that the gold medal game, honestly, one of the best games that I've ever seen. And I had no, despite living in Canada for a while, I had no like sort of uh, you know, loyalty or something. I was just watching as just a casual fan, and it was like I was like sweating.
yeah, it was like heartbreaking for Canadians, but like the two teams, the two countries are very close in terms of talent. Like it's one probably the most evenly matched rivalry you can find, which makes it even more entertaining to watch. So
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'll do my best to get the Australian public to tune in when the Winter Olympics roll around. But yeah, thanks again for coming on and having a chat about what you do and how you got there, and some really important things. I really appreciate it.
no problem.
All right, thanks. Have a good one.